Sequel number 37 of the Church of Uganda at 150 years, a celebration, produced by Christopher Amos Chikomeko Ntambi. In this sequel, the hanging of Charles Stokes in Congo, a coup in Zanzibar, and how come Bishop Tucker is entangled in it, and finally, a Uganda Railway project. Welcome. In the year 1895, one of the Church Missionary Society missionary who had gone bad, and his name was Charles Henry Stokes. This is a gentleman who had become a dealer in caravans, the East African interior caravans, which involved porters, and carrying merchandise for either traders or missionaries or explorers. He had also become a dealer in firearms. Remember the Kabula Christians in exile, getting a lot of help from him. So he had become an arms dealer. Now, the fact that he operated in Tanganyika, and Tanganyika was more of a German sphere of influence, he had kind of joined the German service. That is the only way they could allow him to do what he did in Tanganyika. And in this German service, he kept trading in guns, exchanging it for ivory tusks. Now, in Congo, which was more of a Belgian area of influence, the Belgians in Congo were not happy with his supply of guns to Africans. As far as they were concerned, they thought that arming Africans was empowering them to rebel against European settlements or European conquering of the African continent. So Captain Luthaire, in charge of Congo, arrested Charles Stokes. He gave him a summary trial, and guess what? In a court-martial. Court-martial is usually for soldiers, but here is a whole missionary being tried in a court-martial. I'm sure you know of other places where civilians are also tried in court-martials. But anyway, and this court-martial sentenced Charles Stokes to death. It found him guilty and sentenced him to death. And so Charles Stokes was hanged near River Lindi in the Congo on the 15th of January 1895. But the news of his killing or murder by the Belgians did not reach Buganda until much later. The news from Congo was slow. Now, Charles Stokes, as far as those who dealt with him wrote, say that he respected Africans a great deal. And of course, as a missionary, what would you expect? He was a missionary, simply a missionary gone bad. And gone bad not to become a thief, but to become more of a merchant, merchandising ivory, merchandising guns. He found a lucrative opportunity for him to work or to do other things. But he was not a thief, he was not a robber, he was an honorable man. So he respected Africans much more than the others. For example, the books, those who wrote about him, say that he never ill-treated Africans. And when did he leave the Church Missionary Society? He left them in 1885. Then where was he all this time? Between when the first party and 1885 when he left them, where was he? He was always in charge of caravans. So he began as the in charge of interior caravans with the missionaries. And remember, missionaries were not only Church Christian Missionary Society. There were others. There were the Scottish missionaries. There were the Methodist missionaries. There were the Africa Inland missionaries. So different groups of missionaries. He did not discriminate. As long as you needed to go into the interior, therefore you needed a caravan, therefore you needed porters, and he was providing all that. And therefore, He left the Church Missionary Society as a caravan dealer for them in 1885, and then he started a private business. He remained in the same business, but privately now, on his own. And then, of course, he also became an arms dealer, which the Baganda benefited from as far as Christians fighting Kalema was concerned in 1889, being able to return to the throne of Mwanga the second time, and being able to overthrow Kalema and reinstate Mwanga the second on the throne. So at least we in Buganda can talk very positively about Charles Stokes, although he was a missionary gone bad, but what he did for a living was of great help to the Baganda Christians in exile in Kabula. Now, they also say, those who have written about him in their diaries, that he always kept his word with the porters. If they are, for example, leaving Sardini at Bagamoyo, and they agree on a certain price or a certain pay or a certain salary, he would keep his word. And that therefore, that made him a darling of all the porters across the interior of East Africa. Now this man, such a man, is the one who was hanged by the Belgians. Charles Stokes was a British Irishman, and remember when he contributed to the war, Mwanga gave him a woman or a wife, although he was already married. Mwanga insisted, so he got an additional coach woman called Nanjala, and this Nanjala was actually based in the royal palace. So whenever Charles came visiting, Charles Stokes came visiting, his wife would be available within the enclosure. But otherwise, Charles Stokes had earlier had a wife, actually an English wife, whom he had brought all the way from Europe to Zanzibar. And that wife gave birth to a daughter who was called Louisa. But Louisa died during childbirth, and that English woman never conceived again. However, with Nanjala, Charles Stokes was able to get a son, and the son was named Kasaja Stokes. Kasaja, the son of Charles Stokes, was raised by a Presbyterian missionary whose name my research has not yet found out. And when he grew up, Charles Kasaja married a Swahili woman called Limi, and he got no child with her. So he then later on got a Ugandan woman or a Baganda woman. But before that, he had been educated all the way to England, remember, in the hands of the Presbyterians. He became a medical doctor. I'm talking of Charles Kasaja, the son of Charles Stokes, the Ugandan part. And after becoming a medical doctor, he returned to Uganda, his mother home. And he was able now to marry a Ugandan, Sarah Nambaliwa. So his first wife, Limi, who got no child with him, now he gets married to Sarah Nambaliwa, although this was much later, in 1921. Yeah, and therefore it was Sarah Nambaliwa with, of course, Charles Kasaja, who began the proper family lineage of the Stokes in Buganda. They actually had 8 children, and to date, the Uganda Stokes family are in every corner of this country. Yeah, just talk of the Stokes family, and you will see somebody. Of course, they must be light-skinned. Yeah, they must be light-skinned somehow, because they have that Irish blood. The good news is that Belgium, okay, it's not good news ever to kill somebody, but Belgium eventually compensated Great Britain for killing one of their citizens, and They gave at that time in 1895 or in the late 1890s, they compensated them by paying 8,000 sterling pounds of that time. Now, the money was distributed between Britain and Germany. They compensated these governments for what they agreed was an unfair trial. Yeah, it was such a summary trial in a military court martial. Somebody was not a soldier. So they compensated both the British and the German government. What I'm yet to find out, although I will in my research, is to find out whether the family of the Stokes enjoyed any of the compensation that Belgium gave Britain and Germany. If not, then well, it is time for the descendants to do something about it. Now, so much for the Stokes in this sequel. Let us now visit Bishop Tucker, who is caught in a coup d'etat in Zanzibar. On 1st July 1896, Bishop Tucker and Reverend Roscoe began the journey back to the coast where the cathedral was based, but they used the Tanganyika route. They reached Tubugwe after Mpapwa, an area infected with many lions. Now at night, Simeone, a porter, was eaten by a lion. They found his blood-stained clothing in the morning. On the 7th of August 1896, still on the way to the coast, the bishop at River Mutomawe was seized with dysentery, which incapacitated his walking. He was carried by porters in a trekking hammock for 6 days, but it was not comfortable. For example, they would bump him against trees and sometimes even throw him right on the ground, So finally, they reached the coast at Sadaini, of course near Bagamoyo, where they found the boat MV Barawa, which had been sent by the Zanzibari British authorities to pick him up on arrival. So he was, as usual, admitted to the university's mission hospital in Zanzibar. Now, as far as Zanzibar was concerned at that time, Sultan Thuwaini suddenly died, and his cousin Khalid seized power. The British disagreed, and their squadron entered Zanzibar. On the 24th of August 1896, Bishop Tucker was dispersed from the hospital to a ship for his safety. And again, this was done in a hammock through the deserted streets. And this is what I mean that Bishop Tucker gets caught up in the coup. They were worried about his safety, so they had to get him from the hospital into a ship, although he was still unwell. So on the 25th of August, firefighting began. And when I say firefighting, I mean arms were used. Their firepower was used. The fighting began where Prince Khalid was able to flee to the German consulate. And Prince Hamaudu was installed by the British as the new Sultan of Zanzibar. Now, after the fighting, Bishop Tucker was then returned to the hospital in Zanzibar to recover. He was then able, after recovery, to report to Frederictown, his headquarters, by the 16th of September 1896. So much for that. Let's now finally look at the railway. In Great Britain, the British authorities had carried out a survey, a quantity survey report. The chief engineer in charge of this was called George Whitehouse. He came out with a quantity survey report which approved the construction of the Uganda Railway at a tune of 2 million sterling pounds of the time, simply building the railway from the coast of Kenya, Mombasa, to Port Florence, which we shall later see is what became Kisumu. Actually, construction began on the 30th of May 1896. The actual construction of the railway began, but Africans were very hostile to the project. In fact, they were enemies of the project. And so Britain had no alternative but to go to India and recruit workers. A whole 32,000 workers were migrated from India to the coast of East Africa to begin the project. And this was therefore the beginning of the introduction of Indians in East Africa. As much as the King African Rifle soldiers also from India were around, but those used to move a lot during war and conflicts. They never stayed. It is these constructors of the railway who actually stayed, and they are therefore the origin of the Asian migration into East Africa. Now, I want us to have a perspective of this project, the Uganda Railway. It was to become such a big solution because the journey from the coast to Buganda was so long. In these sequels, we have observed how the missionaries would walk. And I cannot even imagine our generation walking over 1,000 miles for weeks on foot and with luggage which is actually being carried by strangers. Okay, they were porters who were to be paid, but still they were strangers. And also passing through unfriendly terrain, as we shall see shortly. We shall see problems with lions. We shall see problems with the Nandi people. So it is worth celebrating that 150 years of our church, today we can travel from Mombasa to Kampala in 90 minutes by air. As if that is not enough, even if it was by car, within 24 hours, you would have arrived from Mombasa to Kampala. Because even today, our borders are transnight. At any time you want to cross the border, the borders are free. You don't have to wait for hours for the border to open. So a lot of things are worth celebrating. That as we celebrate our faith, that as we celebrate our church, some things need to be scrutinized, for they are worth our celebration. Brethren, that is the 37th sequel. May the good Lord bless us all.